What are some deep, dark secrets your family tried to hide from you, but you found out anyway? My mom tried to poison me on at least 3 or 4 different occasions, on purpose. She would usually undercook food, hoping I would die of food poisoning, I'm guessing. I have no idea if she added anything to it. I became suspicious when I ate some salmonella-tainted chicken. I was young and starving, and later overheard her telling my brother not to eat it because it was meant for me. She had made a big batch of chicken, as she usually did. Some pieces seemed fine, so I ate those instead of the ones that smelled off. I still got sick, but I eventually recovered. According to my uncle, on his deathbed, he said that he once walked into the house with my father and found her trying to hurt me in the tub. Then there was the time she almost shot me. That one truly was an accident. I was chasing my dog after he got off the chain, and I rounded a corner just as she fired. We were outside, the dog ran down the street, and the bullet hit a tree only a few feet from me. We caught him later, and she shot him anyway, then told me he passed of fleas. I had to bury him myself. Story 2. A few years after my father died, I learned that he had been visiting gay hookup spots in the woods where men could meet randomly. He was HIV positive and had kept it a secret from my mom for a couple of years, while still being intimately involved with her. When my mom found out, she was furious, but luckily, she didn't contract HIV. The only thing I remember from that time was my parents having a huge argument, and I was really scared they might get divorced. They stayed together for the kids, and to be honest, aside from the occasional fights, I always had great parents, and we shared a lot of good family times. My mom must have had a really hard time back then. My dad must have struggled too, but they still did a great job raising their children. After my father died, my mom told me everything when I was 16. I was so shocked that I had to hear it a couple of times because I blocked it out the first few times. She had kept it from me because she didn't want me to hate my dad. The funny thing is, my mom is now married to a woman, so I guess you could say both of my parents were gay. Story 3. My aunt is several years younger than my parents, so when I was born, she was just a teenager. When I was about 15, my aunt married a nice guy, and they seemed to settle down. Sort of. At first, things appeared normal, but we later found out that he had been working late and had even rented an apartment downtown, only coming home on weekends. It was odd. Family vacations were really awkward, as they basically refused to talk for 2 entire weeks. They would go into different rooms when the other appeared and made cutting remarks across the dinner table. My parents finally asked what was going on, and my aunt said that my uncle was a low-down jerk who didn't support her and didn't care about her feelings. This didn't seem like him. He was the most attentive guy she had dated, so my mom asked him. It turned out that a year earlier, my aunt had gone on a trip to Mexico with her girlfriends and apparently slept with multiple men while she was there. When she returned, she acted sheepish and apologetic, making him breakfast in bed and buying him gifts. He didn't put 2 and 2 together until he found her Facebook open, with a message from one of the men accusing her of giving him herpes. When he confronted her, she admitted to sleeping with several men in Mexico, but insisted she hadn't given him herpes. He had given it to her. Anyway, he took my cousins and moved to the apartment, trying to make a normal life, but he still loved my aunt, for some ungodly reason. They went through therapy and have been married ever since. The problem is that no one is ever allowed to mention Cancun, herpes, their separation, family problems, or acknowledge that my aunt was unfaithful. So much so that my cousins don't even know. Story 4. I found out that my sister had a child outside of her marriage with another man. She had been planning to leave her husband, who was abusive, both physically and mentally, and took off. She met this guy, who was quite attractive, and they had a brief relationship. In the end, my sister stayed with her husband, who actually cleaned up his act and stopped being a colossal jerk. I can vouch for that. The kicker? She was pregnant with that other man's baby. My nephew was born, and he looked nothing like her husband or his other children. As far as I know, they have never told him, and he doesn't know. I can say this for my brother-in-law. He treats my nephew just like his own sons and has never mistreated him. But I don't like the fact that my nephew doesn't know. They lie to him every day, and it bothers me horribly that I know this secret about his life, when I think he deserves to know. I've been sworn to secrecy, but doesn't he deserve a relationship with his real father? I worry about what will happen if he finds out. He'll realize they lied and will likely be resentful and angry. I know him. He will be angry, and he might not speak to them for a long time, if ever. He's an adult now and still has no clue. Story 5. My grandfather had a chop shop in Massachusetts and stole cars for about 10 years before the cops started going after him. He moved to Virginia, cheated on his first wife, my grandma, got remarried, and continued cheating with her knowledge. One day, I got a phone call from an insurance company asking questions about him. When I told my mom, she took the phone, told them we were not to be associated with him, and hung up. I can't help but think it was actually the Massachusetts FBI or something. Not long after, my grandfather moved to North Carolina from Virginia without telling anyone beforehand. He has since been forced to move again, without telling anyone, while living in an RV. His wife is living in another RV in Florida until they can sell the house in North Carolina. I haven't talked to him in 5 years, except at my brother's wedding this past Saturday. I hate his guts. He also tried to take me and my brother from my mom by going to Child Protective Services and spreading lies about her. About 5 years ago, he even took the woman he was having an affair with on the 6-hour drive from Virginia Beach. We stopped at a rest stop where she gave him blowy. He said, and I quote, "Don't worry, kids are asleep." I was sure as hell not asleep. Story 6. I may have 2 or 3 dead older brothers. I honestly don't know any more than that because nobody in my family will talk about it with me. All I know is that my grandmother on my mom's side has a picture tucked into the frame of a mirror that hangs on her wall. The picture shows my grandmother with 2 boys who look to be between 5 and 8 years old, boys I had never met or heard anyone mention. That picture has been in that same spot for as long as I can remember. One day, when I was young, I was at her house and happened to be looking at the picture while my grandmother was in the next room. She came in to see what I was doing because I had gotten quiet, and I asked her who the kids were in the picture with her. She told me they were my brothers and that there was a third who wasn't in the picture. Thinking I had 3 older brothers, I excitedly asked where they were and why I had never met them. She just walked away and ignored the question. Every attempt after that to ask her or anyone else about the picture or the kids in it was ignored the same way. I eventually gave up asking, since even my parents wouldn't acknowledge it. Edit. To everybody saying I should dig deeper, there's a reason I don't want to. More than likely, they died in a car accident caused by my alcoholic father, an accident that nearly left my mom paralyzed from the neck down. All she has ever told me is that it happened in her mid to late 20s. That she and my dad were in the car, my dad was driving drunk, and they crashed. She woke up in the hospital, unable to move, with doctors telling her she would probably be that way for the rest of her life. The next morning, when she woke up again, she found she could move normally, but her neck hurt horribly. To this day, her neck still hurts, and when viewed from behind, it almost looks as if one of her vertebrae is turned 90 degrees. Any doctor she has seen has said the only cure would be to fuse the vertebrae, and she would rather keep her range of motion and deal with the pain than have part of her neck fused. While it might be nice to know more about the lost brothers, if my inference is correct, I would rather not force my mom to relive the possibility of losing them because of my drunken, careless father. Has already left her with permanent pain. I have no desire to add to it. Story 7. My father was a high-ranking gangster in Hong Kong who did shady things. We always knew he used to be a triad. Whenever we had family events when I was young, there would be a lot of uncles around, and the people who lived near us would avoid us, never look us in the eye, and act extra courteous. I didn't have many friends because other kids' parents were afraid of him. I never understood why they were scared until I overheard him on the phone one day in 1992. My father was always quiet about what he did or what his role was in the organization. And now I understood why. From what I gathered during that call, he was some kind of enforcer. Someone had snitched about the location of their drug warehouses or factories in China, and they knew exactly who it was. They had the man. And my father simply said, "Make it very slow and find his family. You know what to do." After hearing that conversation, I couldn't look my dad in the eye for weeks. He's no longer part of the organization, and he's retired, but sometimes he's still scary. Story 8. I wouldn't really call this dark, but growing up I thought my family was amazing. I believed we all loved each other and everything felt great. But as I got into my teen years, things didn't seem that way anymore. My dad's parents didn't feel as close, and I started to get the sense that they looked down on me and maybe on my mom as well. Not long into my teens, I found out my dad's parents hate my mom. My nan even wrote my dad a letter before the wedding telling him not to marry her. So suddenly, all those big happy family events I thought were real were actually just fake. Now, whenever my dad's parents are over, I can't help thinking, this is all fake. You all hate each other. Why are we pretending? I'm sure my grandparents love me, but I really can't stand how false everything has become. Story 9. When I was 18, I found out by accident that my mother was a meth user. It hit me like a truck, and about 3 weeks after learning the truth, the depression was too heavy to carry. I sat down and talked to my grandmother. As soon as I opened my mouth, my throat tightened, and the floodgates opened. I finally got everything out and asked her about it. She was stunned that I didn't already know, but I had grown up thinking my mom's behavior was normal. Then, my grandmother told me that my dad used it just as much. My dad died when I was 2, so I never knew him, especially not that he had been addicted to something so serious. I also learned that one of my 2 uncles is a frequent meth user. At least now, I know I will never touch that stuff. Story 10. My grandma and step-grandpa had eloped long before their actual wedding ceremony. Apparently, neither of their families wanted them to get married because of their difference in race. My grandma was Filipino, and my step-grandpa was white, so they waited a couple of years for everyone to give their approval. After my grandma passed away, I went through her things and found their marriage certificate from Vegas, which was dated more than a year before the day they were officially married with friends and family as witnesses. I asked my parents about it, and they had no idea. Apparently, nobody else in the family did either. It doesn't seem like such a dark secret now, but since they kept it to themselves and took it to their graves, it must have been a big deal to them at the time. To me, it's mostly just a sweet story, and as someone who had lost faith in romance, it was actually a little encouraging. Story 11. During my parents' divorce, when I was 3, my dad offered my mom a one-time payment of around $15,000 for us to walk out of his life and never deal with him again. He was trying to avoid paying child support, and my mom's lawyer advised her to record every phone conversation with him to use against him. I found out when I was about 12, while looking for blank cassette tapes to make radio mixtapes, and discovered a huge stash under my mom's bed. The first one I picked up was that conversation, queued up to be played for the judge. My dad is kind of a jerk. Story 12. I have a few strange things about my family. Not many are dark, though. My grandmother had 6 children. The last was an accident, the result of her sleeping with the 15-year-old babysitter. After she had my uncle, she put him up for adoption but went back to get him 2 days later. My aunt got pregnant at 15, and my grandmother took her to an abortion clinic under the guise of it being a doctor's office. My aunt had to run away for a few weeks until abortion was no longer an option. That leads to the next story about her daughter, the one she eventually gave birth to. My cousin told her that our uncle, different from the one I mentioned earlier, had SA'd her. My aunt did nothing about it. This same uncle also beat up his former wife, Aunt D, whom I barely remember, because she couldn't get pregnant, and he cheated on her, getting another woman pregnant. He has 2 daughters, but their mother took them away around the same time the accusations came up. Until recently, we didn't know where they were, but he eventually found them. The younger daughter is ignoring him, while the older one, who I remember playing with, seems pretty cool, though I think she might be a slight sociopath. My older half-sister's father was an addict. When given the choice, he chose the drugs over my mother and my sister. They never met until a few years ago, when she was a junior in high school, about 7 months before he died of hepatitis C. My mother dated my father before my sister's father and went back to him after they split. I was a make-up-S baby. About a month after I was born, after being with my mother and helping with my sister, he bailed. He claims my mother told him I wasn't his, but I think he's just shifting the blame. My mother was abused as a child, but that didn't stop her from being an abuser herself. She believed that as long as she didn't physically beat us, it wasn't abuse. She was very mentally abusive, would blow up over anything and everything, and made us feel like everything was our fault. Every failed relationship was blamed on us, making us feel like simply existing was ruining her life. She trashed our rooms, ruined friendships. For example, my mother got into a fight with her boyfriend about not wanting to give him a blowy, when my friend and I were in the next room. She never came over after that. When my sister's father died, his caretaker and girlfriend were neglecting him. He weighed only 85 pounds at the time of his death and was around 5'6". My sister doesn't know this. Story 13. I grew up thinking that my two brothers were my only siblings. However, I found out recently at 31 that my dad had been cheating on my mom before they were married. The other woman was married at the time, and when she got pregnant by my father, she deceived everyone and raised the girl as if she were the product of a healthy marriage. My parents married shortly after that, and 2 years later, I was born. The kicker? My half-sister and I grew up together as friends. We knew each other in school, and neither of us had any idea that we were actually siblings. Story 14. My mother claims that my father is some man who disappeared when she got pregnant. She won't give me a name or any details. My entire life, she has only referred to him as your father and refused to elaborate. Recently, however, my aunt made it clear that this isn't true. We were having dinner. Each of us had a few cocktails, and my aunt said the whole story was ridiculous. She explained that my mother had made herself the victim in the story because she was so ashamed of the truth. I still don't know the full truth, but at least I now know that my father isn't some mysterious man who drifted in and out of town. Story 15. Not me, but a friend. His whole life, he grew up thinking he was adopted. When he was 16, he went to get his learner's permit, but his parents wouldn't give him his birth certificate. They made up a story about how the adoption agency had lost it and that he would need to travel to that state, which was on the other side of the country, to get a new copy. He knew something was fishy, but didn't really find out what was going on until much later. He was 21, and by that point, he and I had grown apart. I only found this out recently after reconnecting with him. His mother died from cancer, and that's when it was all revealed. He was never actually adopted. Neither was his younger sister. One of his older sisters got pregnant twice when she was very young, at 12 and 14. And rather than aborting or putting the children up for adoption, her parents decided to raise them as her own. So, my friend grew up his entire life thinking he was adopted, believing that his mother and father were his adoptive parents and that his siblings were his adoptive siblings. In reality, his adoptive parents were actually his biological grandparents, his adoptive sister was really his mother, and his adoptive siblings were actually his cousins, aunts, and uncles. Story 16. My grandfather adopted my mother when she was very young and never told her. When he died, my grandmother had already passed. We found the adoption papers. He had adopted her when he married my grandmother, who was 16 when she had my mother and married at 18. She always grew up thinking he was her real father, and he did raise her, and she still thinks of him as her father. But she never knew, and was never told who her biological father was or what had happened. She later found out that she actually had a brother, my grandfather's child, whom he gave up when he married my grandmother. Story 17. My aunt was known as the town bicycle as a teenager. She married the man who got her pregnant and went on to have 3 children, all of whom are mentally challenged, with one taken away to live in a care home. Her brother is a Vietnam veteran who got both of his children hooked on marijuana among other drugs. One of them is schizophrenic. He still smokes pot. According to family lore, when he was drunk, he said that when your children are addicts, you always know where they are. He also claims that my aunt had a long-standing affair with her adopted father, and that some of her children may not be fathered by the man she married. He also married an S-worker. My aunt then divorced her first husband and married a PDF file who essayed 2 of her 3 children, the girls. When the older one said what was going on and it went to court, she stood up and said both her daughters were lying. She's still married to the guy, and her daughters are heavily medicated just to lead normal lives. Story 18. When I was 16, my mother was getting sick. I came home from class and found her in the bathroom shaving her head. I asked her what was going on, and she sat me down and told me that she had cancer and was starting chemotherapy, and that she just wanted to go ahead and shave her head. I was supportive of her. She began treatments, but would never let me go with her to the doctor, only going with a friend. When I confronted her about this, she said she wanted to spare me the pain. As time went on, I grew suspicious and asked her what kind of cancer she had. She said lymphoma. I started doing research and realized there was no way she could have it and still work the way she was while undergoing chemotherapy. I called her workplace to ask if she had been missing work, and her boss told me she had claimed to have cancer in her stomach, far from her neck, and they had been giving her time off to see the doctor. I called her doctor, and he said he had no knowledge of this. I also called the insurance company, and while they wouldn't tell me much, they confirmed there were no claims in the last 6 months. I confronted her, and miraculously, she got better a few weeks later. What bothered me most was the catheter she claimed was for chemotherapy. I found it in a box near the trash. It was made from a toothbrush cut in half with a plastic hose taped to it. We haven't been close since I was 17. I am now 34. As you can imagine, I have trust issues, but I have been married for 12 years and have 2 children. The last time I spoke with her, she had cancer in her lungs from heavy smoking and was trying to tell me a new lie, as usual. Story 19. My dad once told me a story about how he flayed a man with a chain and poured vodka into the wounds after a bar fight. That's not even the worst thing my dad has done. His father was also a bare-knuckle fighter and supposedly killed at least 3 people. My granddad, who passed away 2 months ago, also beat his 2 daughters and his wife, once breaking my grandma's foot because she went into town by herself. He was a truly dangerous man. My uncle was literally unstable. He had severe schizophrenia and once set his mother's house on fire because, no joke, the computer told him it had killed his son and that he would be next if he didn't burn the table, which was going to get him. He was also prone to blowing up cars at random, attacking people, and who knows what else. I'm not sure if he refused to take his medication or not. He seemed fairly lucid the few times I was allowed to see him, but he was in and out of mental hospitals and was found dead in a park earlier this year. It's almost surreal how messed up some of my family members are. It doesn't even shock me anymore, though I'm not sure it ever did. My family doesn't really hide anything. I think I'm the only one with the decency to keep my skeletons neatly tucked away in the closet. Story 20. I am the only daughter in my family and have 1 brother. When we were kids, he got into a bad accident and was temporarily crippled. Being young, I was extremely jealous of all the attention he received. My grandparents came over with get-well presents, his friends signed his cast, and my parents doted on him and waited on him hand and foot, especially my mom. She started completely ignoring me. I would come home from school and she would just be hanging out with my brother in his room. I pretty much had to raise myself all through middle and high school. My dad also started acting distant and strange. It was clear to me that they loved him more. One day, I had had enough. I came home from school and saw my mom in my brother's room again. He wasn't even crippled anymore. I went upstairs to his room, opened the door, and was ready to yell at both of them in a fit of rage, and you would never believe what I saw. My mother was with him, getting a little too intimate. I crept out. I don't think they ever noticed me. God, that thing has messed up my life. I haven't really been able to have a normal relationship with my parents since then, and I don't trust people easily. Story 21. My mom's family has 2 stories. One kind of dark, the other not so much. Last year, I found out that most of my mom's Catholic family grows weed, but just earlier this year, I learned why my mom has always hated one of my aunts. My mom is one of 8 children, and I have 22 cousins, though I only speak to one. My mom told me that before I was born, she was babysitting my cousin for a weekend and noticed bruises all over him while giving him a bath. He was 4 or 5 at the time, so my mom asked him how he got them. He went terribly quiet and said, "I wish Mommy and Daddy would never come back so I could live with you and Uncle." She called Child Services, CS, and then called my grandma to see if she knew anything. My grandma told her to drop it because it was none of her business. My cousin hasn't spoken to his parents in years, and now my mom refuses to speak with my grandma or my aunt. Story 22. Not dark, but definitely a shock. I didn't know my grandparents on my mom's side. Years ago, when I asked, my mom said they died in a house fire and she was raised by her grandparents. Okay. My mom is now in her early 70s and starting to have minor heart problems. She doesn't drive well in the big city, so I drove her to her doctor. Sometimes when she gets a lot of information quickly, she can't remember it all, so she asked me to come back into the examination room with her. The doctor came in, looked at her charts and x-rays, and questioned her about her medications. He said he wanted to put in a stent. She was shocked and upset, of course, realizing she was getting older. In an effort to calm her down, the doctor tried to point out that heart disease is usually genetic. And to illustrate that, he started asking about her parents. Doctor, how old was your dad when he died? I knew where he was going. Mom, 25. Doctor, how did he die? Mom, fire. Doctor, what about your mother? How old was she? Mom, 27. That got my attention because I was a little surprised my grandmother was older than my grandfather. Doctor, did she die in the fire too? Mom, no. Doctor, how did she die? Mom, gunshot. Doctor, was it self-inflicted? Mom, yes. Doctor, was it related to the fire? Mom, no. Doctor, well, the reason I was asking is that heart disease usually runs in the family. Mom hasn't said another word about it since. Kinda weird. Story 23. Okay, here it goes. My great-grandmother, who I was lucky to have known, was quite a hussy in her day. She was on a date with one man when she met my great-grandfather, and she left that date with him instead. She also frequently disobeyed her parents by going out dancing, which, at the time, was scandalous. My father and his siblings were essayed by my grandfather and his friends. There were over a dozen children, and none of them disowned this man as their father, even though they had only met him once or twice. He was a jerk. I came to this conclusion before even knowing the full truth. My grandmother is considered highly religious and pro-life. My mother is an abortion survivor. The same grandmother dated a married man, my grandfather. When he divorced, my grandmother stepped in. She became pregnant before they were married. Scandal. My mother was an unwanted child. Story 24. I still haven't completely come to terms with this, but my father has an illegitimate child from before his marriage to my mom. One day, we received a letter from a woman, and I asked my parents who it was from, since handwritten letters are so rare these days. Both of them acted really weird about it, so I pressed for more details. My mother finally told me that my dad probably got a girl pregnant back in his hometown, and the daughter that resulted has been trying to contact him for about 20 years. He refuses to take a paternity test, which makes it seem to me that he is definitely the father. I often wonder about the truth and wish there were some way I could contact her. I feel so guilty that I got to grow up with him while there's a girl out there who so desperately wants to meet him, and all he does is push her away. The sad thing is, I'll probably have to wait until he dies to really know the truth, or at least to seek it out. Story 25. My parents divorced when I was about 12 years old. My dad had cheated on my mother with a woman who is now his wife. However, my stepmom is quite a piece of work. I grew up very sheltered, and she is basically everything my parents tried to protect me from. 1. She is a drunk, not an alcoholic, because she would never admit to having a drinking problem. After her first heart attack, she retired and drank every night at the local bar until my dad had to force her into the car and drive her back home. 2. She has cheated on my father. One time, she tried to claim assault when she was caught. It was later proven that she was lying because the bartender, a friend of my father's, heard her agree to go to the man's car to do it. When she was caught, she was on top of the guy in the car. 3. When I was 14, her mother died. That was when she started getting really strange. She was either drunk or high most of the day. She went around claiming that her father had essayed her for years, saying that her oldest child, my stepbrother, was really her father's son. He later got a DNA test done with the man he had grown up thinking was his father. The results proved he was not his grandfather's son. The man he had thought was his father really was his father. 4. I heard her screaming into the phone at my father, saying she was going to kill herself over something childish. She was heavily involved in theater and had lost a lead role to someone who was a better actress than she was. I heard pills shaking in a bottle in her hand. I called the police on her. After she came home from the hospital, she abused me physically and mentally. I told my dad, but he did not believe me, even with the bruises on my face. I moved out 2 days later and went to live with my mom again. I have not spoken to them in 6 years. Luckily, my mother and that side of the family are mostly normal. I like to tease my mom saying she is an out-of-wedlock baby because her birthday is about 8 months after my grandparents' wedding. She claims she's a honeymoon baby, but she wasn't born early. Sure, Mom. My grandparents loved each other a lot, so I just like to think they couldn't wait until their wedding night. Story 26. 2 years ago, I found out that I used to have a brother. I had never known anything about this. None of my senior family members, who obviously knew, ever said a word. I only started asking questions when my dad misspoke once during a normal conversation. Eventually, they admitted the truth. I have no details, no pictures, no name, and no explanation for why he is no longer with us. After he passed, my parents had another child, which is me. They kept this secret for 18 years. I could sense they did not want to talk about it, and I have never asked or mentioned it since. Now, story 27. When I was 14, my parents were going through a very messy divorce. My dad, being an alcoholic, used alcohol to cope with his frustration. One night, he got painfully drunk and started venting all his rage about my mom and the things that had upset him during their relationship. Most of it I had already heard, as he did this quite frequently. I guess he didn't get the reaction or sympathy he expected from me, so he spilled the worst secret about me. A secret I still wish I had never learned. My mom was terrified of being unmarried, especially coming from a strict Irish Catholic family, and of having to tell her parents. She convinced a friend to lend her identification so she could go to a family planning clinic out of town to have me aborted without my dad finding out. She planned to tell him that she had miscarried. Apparently, the receptionist called to confirm the appointment and left a message on the answering machine, which my dad heard. By sheer luck, that forced him to confront my mom about it, and he ended up talking her out of going through with it. My mom has tried to convince me that my dad completely made this up, but I find it hard to believe he would invent something so awful. At the same time, I can't put it past her to do something like that in a moment of sheer panic. Story 28. I'll try to make this short. A few years ago, a friend and I spent the summer hanging out with one of my cousins. Let's call him Peter. Peter is mentally disabled, I guess, so communication was difficult, but we still had fun together. One day, we were getting ready to leave for the cinema when I noticed a snowboard outside. It looked very familiar, so I asked Peter whose board it was, knowing that no one in his house used it. "It's your brother's," he replied. I remember how he glanced back toward his house as he said it. His sister was just about to leave as well, and I guess he didn't want her to know what we were talking about. I thought that was strange, so I asked, why is it here? While we were walking into town, Peter told me that they had kept my half-brother's snowboard after finding out that he had been raping Peter's sister. Apparently, it had been going on for at least 5 years before anyone discovered it. I started to develop all sorts of theories, thinking, how can this be possible? But I've come to terms with it now. About a year later, I found a court transcript where everything was explained in very descriptive detail. My dad and my half-brother still don't know that I'm aware of any of this. I'm still wondering whether they ever plan to tell me. Story 29. My dad has HIV. I knew he took a lot of medicine, but my mom would always say he had high blood pressure or something, so I never thought twice about it. I was with my now ex-girlfriend talking to my brother and sister when my brother said he felt sorry for our youngest brother, who was 11 at the time. I asked why, and he said that if Dad died, he would be in trouble. I asked why. Didn't Dad have health insurance? He said no, he couldn't get it. I asked why not, and he said, because he has HIV. I was stunned. My mom had apparently told him about 10 years ago, but as the oldest, I had never been told. It's hard knowing that my dad has a limited shelf life. He's gotten sick a few times and had to stay in the hospital for a week at a time. My mom always said it was food poisoning from sushi. My siblings and I love sushi, and we've never gotten sick from it, so it's hard not to think about it. From the outside, my dad seems fine. You wouldn't say anything was wrong. My mom said he got infected from a dirty needle when he got a tattoo. My sister, on the other hand, thinks he went to Mexico with a few military buddies at the time. A couple of his friends got infected too. She believes they may have visited an S-worker there. Story 30. My maternal grandma was an interesting woman, for one thing. She was very superstitious. She was born with a dead twin and believed I might be the reincarnation of her sister, since we were born under the same Chinese zodiac sign. But on to the secrets. She disappeared between the ages of 14 and 18 and returned with a husband who later became a controversial local political figure. She never told anyone what happened during those years. Near the end of her life, she hinted to me that she had spent that time living with a long series of men. I don't know if she used them for money, married them under fake names, or something else, but she ultimately stayed with the last man. The two of them had only one child, very late in life, my mom. They also cared for one of her cousins. I'm not supposed to know this story either, but the cousin ended up scamming my grandma for thousands and married a series of abusive men, one of whom essayed her 2 children. My grandma had plenty of backup funds, though. I'm still in the dark as to how a local politician and his trophy wife went from poverty to riches and then spent most of it over their lives. She took one final secret to her grave, the fact that my mother was adopted. I don't know if she and I are biologically related to them at all or who her real parents were. We found papers confirming the adoption and nothing else. Story 31. Oh man, I've been waiting to share this. There are 2 things my parents, tried to keep from me until my brother finally told me, leaving me pretty much speechless. My maternal grandmother died when I was younger, around 7 or 8, and we never went to her funeral in Detroit, which I always thought was strange. Who doesn't go to their grandmother's funeral? Granted, my mom and her mother had a complicated relationship her whole life, but still. Well, I found out on Thanksgiving of all days that my grandmother had been murdered. 2 young men broke into her house to rob her and stabbed her in her sleep. I was infuriated and sickened, but it made sense why it had taken my mom so long to come to terms with her passing. The second was when I found out about my dad's mother and stepmother passing. I had grown up thinking my step-grandmother was his actual mother, which was fine. She was delightful and an amazing grandmother. But I never met my dad's real mother because she died before I was born. I learned years later that she had hung herself on Christmas Eve. That's when I finally understood why my dad never really fully embraced the Christmas season. Story 32. My uncle was involved with the Mafia. He started a business importing TVs from Moscow to Moldova and had taken a loan to buy all the stock. His trailer full of TVs got jacked, but he thought he could recover by taking another loan and making another run. Unfortunately, his second trailer was also stolen, and there was no such thing as insurance in post-USSR countries in the early 90s. He had friends in the Mafia, and they found out about his business. They were the ones who stole his trailers. He also had some other business dealings with the Mafia that I'm not fully aware of. Anyway, he ended up deep in debt, owing the Mafia money, and basically became their puppet to pay it off. Eventually, he ran away and lived homeless in underground pipes that carry heat from factories to homes. Some places in Europe use these systems to distribute heat from factories to households. Eventually, he was found and poisoned. He is dead now. It's tragic, but it carries a valuable lesson. Watch who you trust. Never trust the Mafia. They are not your friends. They are out to make money. They will steal from you, use you, and eventually kill you. You can't be successful in the Mafia unless you are on top or constantly making them rich. My uncle also had a girlfriend and a child. Her brother was in the Mafia as well and was somehow involved in my uncle's murder. None of our family has had contact with them ever since, and we don't know where they are or how to find them. On one hand, I really want to meet my cousin, but on the other, it could bring so much pain. Story 33. I recently found out 2 dark secrets from my parents. First, my dad apparently suffered from anorexia when he was in college. He lost a disastrous amount of weight from undereating and overexercising. He's still a tiny little guy, but at least he eats now. My maternal grandfather apparently has an entire second family hidden away in the mountains. In his home country, where my mom was also born, he worked as a traveling medicine man and doctor, often away for months at a time in the mountains and remote regions. Apparently, he was something of a womanizer during this period, which caused a lot of bitterness from his wife and children back home who felt abandoned and betrayed for most of their lives. Mom recently got to meet a whole slew of half-siblings and their children when she visited her home country. It was utterly bizarre. She used to be the youngest of 6 children, and now she has a new brother who is my age. Story 34. My scumbag millionaire cousin who owns gold mines around the world and is big into the stock market convinced my parents and several of their friends to buy into a stock. It was my parents' first experience with the stock market, and he made it sound like such a sure thing that they used my university fund they had been saving for me. So, of course, my parents and their friends bought in. The stock went up, my cousin cashed out, and then it completely collapsed. My parents lost everything. This guy is the reason I had to get a student line of credit and am currently $10,000 in debt. I refuse to show him any kind of respect whenever I see him now. Story 35. I was always told that my grandfather, my mother's father, had died of natural causes. Not too long ago, I found out some dark, gruesome details about his death. He was stationed in France as an army officer during the Second World War. That's where he met my grandmother, a Russian woman who had fled her homeland, changed her name to protect herself from fascists, and escaped her own country's communist dictatorship at the same time. My grandfather met this beautiful foreign woman and immediately fell in love with her. They had a whirlwind romance, and he brought her back to his farm in Oregon. They married and had 2 children. But my grandmother had accepted the marriage mainly so she could come to the United States legally. She left him after my uncle was born, and my grandfather did not take it well. After the Second World War, he became increasingly uneasy with life. Even though he was a farmer and mostly kept to himself, things were clearly not right. My grandmother had full custody of their 2 children, so my grandfather would visit them. But during those visits, he started harming himself, and not in a small, discreet way. He would take out his Second World War bayonet and carve slits into his arms in front of my grandmother, my mother, and her brother. He was deeply depressed, and eventually, he was no longer allowed to see his children or his ex-wife. One summer, some kids were swimming in a lake and found him body on a sandbar. He had gone missing during the winter, and no one had heard from him since. The autopsy showed that he had jumped into a frozen lake. He had placed a note inside an empty whiskey bottle, tucked it into his coat, and then gone in. One thing I find especially eerie is that my mother still has that note today. Story 36. Nothing too dark, but I recently learned that my mother's father strongly disapproved of her marrying my father. My mom is white and of European descent, and my dad is a mostly black mix of American descent who came from a very poor family. Given the time period, they were dating in the 80s and my grandfather was probably in his late 50s, it unfortunately is not all that surprising. It also makes my relationship with him make a little more sense. Out of my parents' 4 kids, my brother is white, my 2 sisters look a bit like Pocahontas, and I'm the one who looks the least white. Most people guess I'm Dominican for some reason. There was never any real connection between us, and it always felt like he was annoyed whenever he had to be around me. But honestly, he has Alzheimer's now and cannot even remember his own children, so I am not too torn up about it. Story 37. My parents used to live in Russia before moving to Germany, where I was born. My father had a very hard childhood. He is the second youngest of 6 children, and his father died when he was 12. Life was rough for a boy like him in Russia back then. I do not know much about his past, but I do know he has a 5-inch scar on his stomach. I always assumed he had been stabbed at some point, but he insists it came from a surgery he had as a child. My mom also once told me that he went to jail in Russia for a crime his brother committed. These days, he struggles with alcohol and sometimes becomes very depressed, but he has never been abusive. He gets all the support he needs from me and my mom. Some days, he will sit in the garage, drink, and cry. He never tells me why he is so sad. I have suggested he see a psychologist, but he does not want to. I love him. Story 38. This will probably get buried, but whatever. I have a brother and a sister, both older than me. I am 21 now. My childhood was great, but my parents got divorced when I was 6. It was my dad's second divorce. No big deal. Plenty of people have parents who divorce once, right? Life went on. When I was 16, I was having dinner with my grandma and made a joke about my dad getting divorced twice. She corrected me and said that my mom had been divorced twice as well. What the hell? My mom never said a word, not even to my sister, and the 2 of them are extremely close. It turns out my mom married a man when she was around 22. He beat the living hell out of her, and she was too scared to tell anyone. My grandpa eventually came to her house, found out what was happening, and told the man he would kill him if he ever came back. Now, my mom is incredibly strong. She is married to a wonderful husband, and he is the greatest stepdad in the world. I just think it is strange that she never mentioned any of this. I guess she just wants to forget it. I feel like she would be crushed if she knew I found out about her first marriage. Story 39. These are not really secrets. Both sides of my family know about them, but everyone just seems to shrug it off. I have never asked directly. This is all stuff I have overheard. Everything takes place in a remote indigenous town in Michoacán, Mexico. My grandmother on my mom's side once tried to stab a man after the law ruled in his favor. Apparently, she had to be physically held back. On another occasion, she told me, while drunk, that she wanted to put out a hit on the man who killed her brother. My grandfather on my dad's side killed his first wife. That is all I know and all I have ever heard. My great-grandfather on my dad's side killed several people back in the day. He lived to an old age, but I have been told that his coffee was poisoned. The quarrels behind all of this apparently involved money, and he amassed a sizable fortune and many properties. He did not trust banks and would hide money in the mountains surrounding the town in several different spots. He died in the early 90s. I do not remember meeting him, but my older brother does. Even today, the older people in the area still talk about the money he hid and the possible locations. But there are many mountains, and they rise several thousand feet. After he died, his sisters cheated him out of the land he owned. My youngest brother is named after him, and his sisters give my younger brother money whenever they see him, apparently to calm my great-grandfather's soul. They are afraid he will come back and try to reclaim his property through my younger brother. Story 40. My mother told me that her husband was my real father. She and my family bullied me into not being told the truth. I found out when I was 16 during a fight between my uncle and my mother that the man I had always known as my father was not actually my father. I came to find out that I am half Middle Eastern. My mom had a relationship with a Middle Eastern man, and she had been hiding it from me, probably out of shame or fear of how I might react toward my stepfather. There was a lot leading up to this moment, little pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. My stepfather and mother both have blonde hair and blue eyes, while I have black hair and brown eyes. My grandpa would always tell me, "One day you'll understand." When I complained to him about how my stepfather treated me, my stepfather treated me like a red-headed stepchild. No offense to red-headed stepchildren of Reddit. I also found out that I have a sister from my real father. I had no idea she existed for the first 18 years of my life. My mother had bullied them into not coming around as well, so there was a lot of fear that she might do something drastic to me, or herself, if they said anything. My uncle, being the brave man he is, told me when I was 16. I can't even explain all the emotions I felt. There were too many to list. Story 41. I was never allowed to meet my grandfather on my dad's side. My parents are both from a small town across the country, so it didn't come up very often. I was never told why, until last year, when I learned that my grandfather had essayed 2 of my aunts when they were young. Also, my father shared a bed with his older brother for years, and he was essayed by him the whole time. My dad's sister, when she was 19, had a baby and was forced to hide it and go away to a group home to give birth. This was in the 1960s, and they were a very religious family. My dad didn't even find out about it until maybe 10 years ago, because he was only 2 or 3 when it happened. Another aunt on my dad's side, though not blood-related, once pretended she had cancer. She also adopted a child when I was about 4. They kept him for a year. Then she decided it was too much work and returned him. I didn't know any of this until the last year or so. My dad is the youngest in his fairly large family. There are 15 years between him and the oldest sibling, so all my cousins are significantly older than me. Pair that with the fact that I live half a country away from them, and it becomes pretty easy to hide all this messed up stuff from me. The last few times I visited, I pressed my cousins and my mom for information, and eventually it all came out. It really sucks being the one person in the family who is completely in the dark about everything, only to be told that half the family are bad people I shouldn't associate with. It sort of explains why I've been isolated from that side of the family. They're all so messed up. Luckily, my mom's side is the most functional, awesome family ever. Story 42. Okay, so it all began with my great-grandma, Gigi. She had my great-aunt and my grandma in 1955 and 1956 during her first marriage. The marriage ended in divorce shortly afterward because of her husband's infidelity. She did not remarry until the late 1960s. She then had what everyone thought was her third and final child in 1969. It wasn't until the mid-90s that Doug, Gigi's sister Nancy's son, found out that Nancy was not his mother. Gigi was. Between her divorce and remarriage, Gigi had been involved with a very prominent Italian man with vague ties to the Mafia. She had fallen in love, but because she was not Catholic and had been previously married with children, he rejected her. She became pregnant, presumably to keep him close, but he still refused. Here's where it gets twisted. Gigi sent my grandma and her sister to their grandparents' farm while she went into hiding. She struck a deal with Nancy. Out of fear that people would find out she had become pregnant out of wedlock, Nancy would pretend to be the mother while Gigi ran off to California and had Doug listed under Nancy's name. Furthermore, about 4 or 5 years ago, another man came forward claiming Gigi was his mother as well. The disturbing part is that she gave this child up for adoption. Story 43. I was born with cerebral palsy. It's not too severe, but I need crutches to walk, and I slur my speech quite a bit. I know I'm very fortunate to even be able to do these things. The difficult part is that I found out my mom was smoking when she was pregnant with me. Of course, this might not be the only cause of my condition, and I'm not entirely certain, but I am fairly convinced there's a connection. I only found out when she became pregnant last year. She hadn't smoked for 16 years, but one day, I saw her lighting a cigarette in the parking lot of a gas station. I didn't bring it up because I was scared of her, but I did find and throw away her cigarettes. Luckily, a few months later, she had a perfectly healthy baby sister. Around that time, my parents started having marital problems. They wouldn't tell me exactly what was going on, but they were becoming very cold with each other. They even kicked me out of the house for a while to work things out. It turned out that after having the baby, my mom had cheated on my dad with an old coworker. I found out from my dad one night when I was back home. He had a few glasses of wine and started spilling everything. At that point, I didn't think I would ever be able to forgive my mom for everything she had put me and my dad through. So I decided to confront her. I said, "Mom, why do you have to be such a... It was hard to get the words out, my speech slurring and my voice catching. She turned to face me, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Your father, he cooks meth. He's Heisenberg." I spun around to see my dad standing in the doorway brandishing a revolver. "You're goddamn right," he said. I reacted instinctively, hitting him in the face with my crutches and stepping over. Him. Then I jumped into my Ford Challenger and drove straight to Uncle Hank's house, shaken and unsure of what would happen next. "Unca Hank," I said, "Dad's a dealer." "Walter?" Uncle Hank asked. I never would have guessed. That son of a... Suddenly, 2 bald Mexican twins appeared and smashed him over the head with a rock. He pulled me close and, with his last breath, whispered, "Jesus Christ. They're minerals. So yeah, my family is a little messed up." Story 44. I grew up thinking my biological father died of a heart attack. He passed away when I was a couple of months old. I never knew many details about his death, other than that he was working overseas at the time. The summer before college, my sister told me that he had an affair with another woman while working abroad. My birth had caused him to change his mind and return home to care for me. But one morning, his roommate found him dead. My sister said that my mom suspects he was killed by his mistress, but she never investigated. My biological father's family blamed my mom for his death, so she received no support raising me and my sister as we grew up. I never really noticed how little contact I had with his family, but now it makes sense. My mom still doesn't know that I know. Story 45. I have a good one, but it's a little complicated. After my parents divorced, my dad married a gold-digging woman who was nice enough to us kids that we never complained. She worked as a secretary for a company, but eventually left for another job and no one knew why. Fast forward a few years, I was taking care of an elderly man who was dying of lung cancer, COPD, and other illnesses. His daughter-in-law came by occasionally with groceries and supplies. We got to talking, and she learned my name. She said, "Oh, I know your dad, and your stepmom used to work for our company." After that, she started acting kind of weird. One day, she had me follow her outside and asked how I got along with my stepmom. I said, "Oh, she's okay." She replied, "Well, don't trust her." I was confused. She continued, "Out of respect for your dad, we didn't tell anyone or press charges against your stepmom, but we caught her writing checks to herself from the company account. We asked her to leave. I have all the documents if you ever want them. They prove she did this." I'm completely shocked and unsure what to do. I eventually pushed it out of my mind because I didn't want it to damage her relationship with my dad, but if I had wanted to, I could have blackmailed her, extorted her, or even had her sent to jail since she stole a great deal of money. Still, I keep this as an ace up my sleeve in case she ever tries anything shady. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.